Thousands walk the Appalachian trails every year. Some never come back. A child steps behind a bush and vanishes. A hiker turns at a junction and is never seen again. Phones lose signal. Light fades faster than expected. Footprints disappear into the tread. Official searches sweep miles of forest and still come up empty. What is happening out there? Why do these mountains keep absorbing people without a trace? Paint marks and old footpaths. The Appalachian Mountains contain routes built for different purposes and maintained to different standards. A marked hiking trail can run beside the trace of an older roadbed, a stock path, or a short connector made by repeated use. In many places, those lines meet and separate without a clear boundary on the ground. The tread that looks most traveled is not always the one that stays with the official route. On the Appalachian Trail, the main corridor is commonly marked with white paint blazes intended for daylight travel. Blazes are small rectangles, placed so that the next one is usually visible after a turn or a short straight stretch. In dense summer growth, visibility tightens to a few yards. A side path to a shelter, a viewpoint, or a water source may begin in the same corridor and feel correct for a short distance. When a person realizes the markers have stopped, the ground behind them can look similar to the ground ahead. Across the range, ridges and drainages shape small decisions. A step off a ridge can place someone on a slope that encourages continued descent, because climbing back to the crest feels harder than moving forward. Narrow gaps can carry sound in ways that make distance difficult to judge. Mountain laurel and rhododendron thickets can block a view at close range and quiet footfalls. These are ordinary features of the region, but they are also the conditions under which many short, unplanned detours begin. In Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the Appalachian Trail shares high ground with older lines of travel between gaps. Backcountry campsites and shelters are reached by short approach paths. The park's terrain drops quickly from the ridges into coves and ravines. In mist or rain, depth and distance flatten, and direction becomes a matter of slope and feel rather than landmarks. On Saturday, the 14th of June 1969, 6-year-old Dennis Lloyd Martin disappeared in the Spence Field area of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The event is documented in National Park Service records, including a later released chronological narrative of the search. Dennis was visiting the park with his family on a Father's Day weekend trip. Their route placed them along the high country between Russell Field and Spence Field, close to the Appalachian Trail. The last confirmed sighting was in late afternoon, around 4:30 p.m. Adults were near the trail corridor while several children played close by. Accounts describe the children planning a small surprise, crouching in brush beside the trail. Dennis moved behind a bush to hide. Other children came back toward the adults. He did not reappear with them. Within minutes, an adult realized he was missing and began searching along the trail and around the nearby campsite area. The first search was immediate and local. Family members and nearby hikers checked behind trees, around the open parts of the field, and along the tread in both directions. When the child did not respond, the group contacted park personnel. Rangers began organizing a wider effort that treated the location as a moving problem rather than a fixed point. Searchers were assigned to check likely travel lines, such as the main trail corridor, nearby drainages, and the slopes that drop away from Spence Field into thick cover. The park chronology records details that are operational, not interpretive. It identifies the area, the time, and what Dennis was wearing: a red t-shirt, short green trousers, and low-cut Oxford shoes. It notes weather that affected work in the first days, including rain and heavy mist. Wet ground complicates tracking, and reduced visibility limits how much terrain can be cleared quickly from the ridges. The search expanded to a scale unusual for the park. Hundreds of people were involved as days passed, including park staff, volunteers, and organized units brought in for additional coverage. The National Guard participated. A separate team of Green Berets conducted a search effort as well. Crews moved through ravines and along streams where travel is slow and lines of sight are short. In the Smokies, a person can be close in straight-line distance but separated by steep, folded ground that forces long detours and produces blind pockets. Reports from the search period show how physical traces were scarce and often ambiguous. Searchers described child-sized footprints leading toward water, but officials did not treat the prints as confirmed evidence. Over time, more people entered the same terrain, and the ground changed under repeated movement. Leaf litter was disturbed, soft soil was churned, and new tracks cut across older ones. In steep country, even careful teams create fresh lines that can resemble the faint beginning of a route. Spence Field itself is not a single enclosed point. It is a broad ridge area with multiple approach lines, a campsite corridor, and the Appalachian Trail passing through. From a child's height, brush and minor folds in the ground shorten visibility. A few steps behind cover can remove an adult from view. A brief run downslope can put the ridge crest between the child and the trail. Once below that crest, sound can shift with the wind and the shape of the cove, and the direction of calling can be hard to locate without a clear line of sight. The documented response shows how quickly an off-tread movement can become a large search problem in the Appalachian high country. Organizers worked outward from the last confirmed point, checking the main trail corridor and the natural drainages that pull movement downhill. Weather limited early progress, and the terrain forced teams to move slowly in dense vegetation. Despite the scale of the operation, the main record that remains is the chronology of where people searched, when they searched, and how the landscape shaped what could be seen and reached. In the late 1960s, the park's backcountry system relied on paper permits, posted notices, and ranger stations, rather than portable radios for every field team. Trail junctions that are signed today were sometimes marked more lightly, and temporary storm damage could leave fresh deadfall that pushed hikers around the intended tread. When people in the area later tried to describe the moment of separation, they returned to small facts: a child stepping into brush, a field edge, a short time interval. The larger setting was still the same mix that defines much of the Appalachian corridor, where official routes sit inside older, quieter pathways that remain walkable. The quiet geometry of junctions. Trail systems in the Appalachian Mountains are built in layers. A long-distance corridor, such as the Appalachian Trail, passes through federal land, state forest, county right-of-way, and private easement. Along that corridor, secondary routes branch off toward shelters, water sources, road crossings, and former fire towers. Each junction represents a decision point, even when it appears simple. White blazes mark the main Appalachian Trail. Blue blazes typically indicate side trails leading to shelters, summits, or springs. In some sections, local clubs maintain additional loops that intersect the primary tread. Signage varies by land manager and by year of installation. A wooden post may list destinations in mileage, while an older metal sign may point only toward a shelter name. In fog or fading light, painted marks and carved letters can recede into bark and shadow. The physical layout of a junction is not always symmetrical. One branch may continue straight while the official route turns sharply. A side trail may descend gradually, giving the impression of continuity, while the main corridor climbs on rock steps. Hikers often describe following the path of least resistance for several minutes before noticing the absence of familiar markers. When the tread remains clear and recently maintained, doubt can be delayed. In Shenandoah National Park, the Appalachian Trail shares space with a network of side paths that lead to waterfalls, viewpoints, and historic structures. The park's corridor is narrower than in many national forests, and road crossings occur at regular intervals. Short spur trails connect the main ridge to lower parking areas and boundary fences. During peak season, foot traffic can press informal shortcuts into the soil near established intersections. On the 9th of October 2009, 20-year-old Meredith Emerson set out with her dog, Ella, for a day hike on the Freeman Trail near Vogel State Park in North Georgia. The trail lies within the Chattahoochee National Forest, south of the Appalachian Trail corridor, but inside the same southern Appalachian terrain system. The case is documented in court records from Union County, Georgia, and in reporting by regional newspapers at the time of trial. The Freeman Trail is a loop that rises from the lake area of Vogel State Park toward Blood Mountain. It connects with the Appalachian Trail near the summit. At certain points, hikers can choose between remaining on the loop or transitioning to the long-distance corridor. Trail markers change color and style at those intersections. Wooden posts and small paint blazes share space with older signage. Witness accounts from October 9 describe Meredith beginning her hike in the late morning. Other hikers later reported seeing her on the trail, some recalling brief exchanges about the route. One hiker testified that he passed her and her dog near the top of the loop. Another noted seeing her speak with a man later identified as Gary Michael Hilton. Search efforts began when Meredith did not return home. Law enforcement agencies, including the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, coordinated ground searches along the Freeman Trail and adjoining sections of the Appalachian Trail. Volunteers moved outward from parking areas and trailheads. Helicopters surveyed open ridgelines, while foot teams checked side paths and drainages. Court testimony established that Meredith encountered Hilton near a junction area where the Freeman Trail approaches the Appalachian Trail. The meeting point was not remote in terms of map distance, but it was beyond the immediate view of the lake and park facilities. The trial record indicates that she attempted to continue along the trail system while Hilton followed. The landscape consisted of mixed hardwood forest with undergrowth that limits sightlines beyond short distances. The junction geometry in that area includes a bend where the loop narrows before merging with the ridge trail. A hiker moving at a steady pace can pass through the intersection in seconds. In off-peak hours, traffic may thin to isolated individuals. The transition from a managed park path to a broader national forest corridor occurs without a physical barrier. Painted blazes and foot-worn soil indicate direction, but there is no constructed gate. Meredith Emerson's remains were later located in Dawson County, Georgia, after Hilton led investigators to the site in January 2008 following his arrest. The judicial record provides a sequence of dates, movements, and statements. Hilton was convicted of murder and received a life sentence in Georgia. The case remains documented in trial transcripts and sentencing report. The trail junction itself was not inherently unsafe. It functioned as designed, linking two maintained routes in a public forest. Yet it illustrates how intersections concentrate variables. Hikers pause there to check maps or water bottles. Conversations may begin at those pauses. A person who intends to leave the main tread can do so under the appearance of normal movement. Once beyond the visible bend, the terrain absorbs sound and sight. In many Appalachian parks and forests, similar junctions exist at regular intervals. Some are marked by simple paint blazes on trees without signposts. Others have weathered wooden arrows that tilt over time. Seasonal leaf cover can obscure the base of a post, and storm damage can temporarily shift the flow of foot traffic. Maintenance crews repaint blazes annually in many sections, but growth cycles alter the look of the corridor between those visits. Law enforcement guidance following documented incidents often emphasizes staying on marked trails and informing others of intended route. Park literature notes that side trails may be less traveled and less frequently patrolled. These are administrative responses recorded in agency materials rather than interpretations of any single event. The geometry of a junction is measurable. It can be plotted on a topographic map as the meeting of contour lines and footpaths. On the ground, it is experienced as a moment of choice framed by trees and paint. In the southern Appalachians, those choices occur within dense forest cover and rolling elevation. The Freeman Trail intersection near Blood Mountain remains open to hikers today, marked in blue and white. Sound carries differently in a cove. Mountain terrain alters sound in ways that are measurable and often misjudged. In the Appalachian Range, narrow hollows, steep-sided ravines, and layered ridgelines redirect and dampen voices. A call projected downhill can be absorbed by vegetation and slope, while a sound from below may seem to rise from a different direction than its source. Search manuals for national parks in the eastern United States note that acoustic perception is unreliable in broken ground, particularly where watercourses and rock faces reflect or scatter noise. In Shenandoah National Park, the Appalachian Trail runs close to Skyline Drive for much of its length, yet the forest between them can be thick. Side trails descend from the ridge toward waterfalls and boundary fences. A hiker standing near the crest may hear traffic faintly from the road while losing track of a companion only a short distance downslope. Leaves, branches, and the curvature of the terrain interrupt sightlines quickly. On the 13th of September, 2021, 27-year-old Brian Laundrie was reported missing in Florida after returning home from a cross-country trip. Although his disappearance did not occur on the Appalachian Trail, the subsequent search focused on the Carlton Reserve, a large natural area in Sarasota County characterized by wetlands, hammocks, and dense brush typical of parts of the southeastern coastal plain connected ecologically to the broader Appalachian system. The search was documented extensively by the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Carlton Reserve covers more than 24,000 acres of mixed terrain. Trails and service roads cross the property, but large sections are accessible only on foot. Water levels fluctuate with seasonal rain. During the search in September and October 2021, heavy rainfall affected ground conditions. Law enforcement deployed drones, K-9 units, and airboats. Officers reported that dense vegetation and standing water limited visibility and muffled sound. Search updates released during that period described teams moving slowly through brush that restricted both sight and hearing. Helicopter crews noted that canopy cover reduced the usefulness of aerial observation. K-9 handlers worked in grid patterns along established trails and in less defined areas where foot travel leaves minimal disturbance. Despite the proximity of search teams operating simultaneously in different sectors, communication relied on radios rather than voice calls due to terrain absorption. On the 20th of October 2021, Partial human remains were discovered in the Myakkahatchee Creek Environmental Park area, adjacent to the Carlton Reserve. The location was near a trail previously searched, but underwater at the time. Law enforcement statements confirmed that the remains were later identified as Brian Laundrie. The official chronology, released in press briefings and agency statements, details dates of search expansion, weather impacts, and coordination between local and federal units. The terrain in that case differs from high Appalachian ridges, yet the acoustic conditions share characteristics relevant to mountain searches. Dense foliage reduces the range of the human voice. Waterlogged ground absorbs footfall noise. Wind moving through palmetto and hardwood stands creates background sound that masks individual calls. Search coordinators often note that people in wooded areas may fail to hear responders, even when separated by short horizontal distance. In the Appalachian Mountains proper, similar observations appear in after-action reports. Search teams in western North Carolina have documented situations where whistle blasts were audible only within narrow corridors aligned with the slope. Outside those alignments, the same signal diminished rapidly. Official guidance from park agencies instructs lost hikers to remain in one location once they recognize disorientation, in part because wandering reduces the chance that searchers will pass within effective hearing range. Coves in the southern Appalachians often form amphitheater-like basins. In certain conditions, echoes create the impression of multiple callers. Search personnel are trained to triangulate sound by position rather than direction alone. The practice is procedural and documented in training materials, emphasizing controlled sweeps rather than response to a single auditory cue. During the 2021 Florida search, public updates referenced environmental limitations rather than dramatic events. Officials stated that large portions of the reserve had been underwater for weeks, making earlier access impossible. When water receded, previously submerged areas became searchable. The remains were located near a trail, within a zone that had been part of earlier grid patterns, but inaccessible due to flooding. The relationship between terrain and perception is consistent across eastern wooded landscapes. Whether in a high cove along the Blue Ridge or in a coastal hammock in Florida, vegetation density and ground composition alter how sound travels. Individuals may call out and assume they are heard farther than is physically likely. Conversely, searchers may operate within range of a stationary person without mutual awareness if wind direction and slope intervene. Public land managers in the Appalachian region continue to publish guidance on audible signaling devices. Whistles are recommended over voice because they carry more efficiently through forest cover. Even so, documented search reports caution that whistles may not penetrate heavy growth beyond a limited radius. The acoustic environment remains variable and dependent on microtopography. The Carlton Reserve case remains part of federal investigative records and court filings related to the broader timeline of events. Its search component illustrates operational challenges familiar to Appalachian rescue units. Dense vegetation, fluctuating water levels, and irregular terrain complicated detection despite concentrated resources. In wooded mountains and adjacent ecosystems, sound does not travel in straight lines across map contours. It follows slope, wind, and the spaces between trunks. That physical fact appears repeatedly in search documentation across the region. Water lines beneath the leaf litter. In the Appalachian Mountains, elevation and rainfall interact in ways that are not always visible from the trail itself. The range acts as a spine that collects moisture from prevailing weather systems. Water moves downward through soil and fractured rock, reappearing as seeps and springs along slopes. These small water sources often sit only a few yards from marked routes, yet they belong to separate channels that angle away from the main corridor. Across the region, surface water shapes the smallest movements. Springs emerge from slopes where groundwater meets impermeable rock. Seasonal streams appear after sustained rain and fade to damp soil when the ground dries. Established trails often cross these lines of drainage at shallow angles, but unofficial footpaths sometimes follow them directly. A person who leaves a marked tread and encounters a trickle of water may continue along it, assuming that a stream will lead toward a larger landmark. Hydrologists describe the region as a network of short, steep watersheds. In the southern Appalachians, headwater creeks descend quickly through narrow hollows before joining larger rivers. These upper drainages are often shaded by hemlock and rhododendron, limiting light and visibility. Leaf litter accumulates along the banks, masking small depressions and rocks. During dry months, a creek bed can appear passable, resembling a natural corridor between slopes. Park management documents note that lost hikers frequently travel downhill in search of water or easier walking. This tendency is recorded in search and rescue training materials used by agencies in the eastern United States. Teams often prioritize stream beds and drainage lines when planning initial grid patterns. The reasoning is procedural. Water channels create linear pathways that draw movement. In April 2018, 6-year-old Geraldine Largay disappeared while hiking the Appalachian Trail in Maine. Although Maine lies north of the Central Appalachian Corridor, the same long-distance route runs continuously from Georgia to that state. The case is documented in reports by the Maine Warden Service and in coverage by regional newspapers following the discovery of her remains in 2015. On the 22nd of July, 2013, Largay separated briefly from her husband near the Appalachian Trail in Franklin County, Maine, to relieve herself off the path. She intended to return within minutes. When she did not reappear, her husband contacted authorities. Search efforts began that same day and expanded over subsequent weeks. Wardens, volunteers, and canine units focused on areas adjacent to the trail corridor, including nearby drainages and low-lying terrain. The section of trail where she was last seen passes through mixed forest with intermittent bogs and shallow streams. Official reports indicate that she likely became disoriented after stepping off the main tread. Instead of regaining the white-blazed corridor, she moved through dense undergrowth. Evidence later recovered from her campsite showed that she remained within a few miles of the trail, but did not relocate it. In October 2015, a logging surveyor discovered her remains and campsite approximately 2 miles from the Appalachian Trail. Items recovered included a tent, personal belongings, and a journal. Entries in the journal documented her attempts to contact her husband and her efforts to remain in place after realizing she was lost. The Maine Warden Service stated that she had likely succumbed to exposure in the remote forest. Although the Maine terrain differs in latitude from the southern Appalachians, the structural features are comparable: narrow drainages, thick vegetation, and limited long-distance sightlines. In the Largay case, search teams combed watercourses and swamps in proximity to the last known point. Flooded sections and dense growth restricted access in some areas. Reports emphasized that she had not strayed far in absolute distance, but the ground between her location and the trail was uneven and obscured. Streambeds in Appalachian forests can present false continuity. A dry channel may appear to lead toward open ground while gradually curving into thicker cover. Fallen logs create obstacles that encourage lateral movement away from the waterline. In wet conditions, creeks swell and alter their shape, covering tracks and erasing minor disturbances. Search documentation often notes that high water after rain complicates tracking along these routes. Training materials for Eastern search units reference downhill drift as a common behavioral pattern. The concept is practical rather than theoretical. When terrain slopes consistently in one direction, movement tends to follow that gradient. Water reinforces the direction of travel, acting as both guide and barrier. Creeks that appear shallow at one crossing can deepen rapidly downstream, forcing a hiker to adjust course and potentially increasing separation from the original point. In Maine, the Largay search included aerial reconnaissance, ground teams, and canine units over a prolonged period. Despite extensive effort, her location remained undetected until years later, partly due to the density of the forest and the subtlety of her campsite's footprint. The official summary released by authorities described the area as remote but within the broader trail corridor. Appalachian watersheds from Georgia to Maine share common traits of steep gradients and vegetative cover. Even short distances off the main tread can intersect with minor drainage lines that draw movement. Park advisories often instruct hikers who are lost to stop and remain visible rather than following streams, unless specifically trained in navigation. These advisories are published as preventive guidance based on documented patterns. In forested mountain terrain, water shapes the ground beneath the leaves. It defines subtle corridors that are not always marked on casual maps. Official reports from the Maine Warden Service show that Largay remained near the Appalachian Trail corridor, while separated by terrain that concealed her from passing hikers and search teams. The physical layout of that landscape, structured by small streams and uneven slopes, formed the setting recorded in investigative files. Distances that shrink on paper, topographic maps reduce terrain to contour lines and measured intervals. A mile on paper appears uniform, regardless of slope, surface, or cover. In the Appalachian Mountains, that reduction can obscure the physical effort required to move between 2 points. Elevation gain compresses horizontal distance into vertical exertion. Dense vegetation converts straight lines into indirect travel. The result is that proximity measured in inches on a map does not always correspond to ease on the ground. The Appalachian Trail corridor crosses 14 states. In many sections, it parallels roads, rivers, or park boundaries within a short, linear distance. From overlooks, parking areas can be visible below the ridge. However, the route between those features may descend through switchbacks, rocky ledges, and narrow saddles. Printed mileage signs provide objective numbers, but they do not communicate the cumulative effect of grade and footing. Park orientation materials advise hikers to estimate time based on terrain rather than distance alone. A commonly cited guideline is that average hiking speed decreases significantly on steep ascents or descents. Search and rescue reports in the region frequently document individuals who underestimated the time required to return to a trailhead before dark. The discrepancy between map scale and lived terrain becomes more pronounced as daylight fades. In January 2023, two-year-old Julian Sands was reported missing in the San Gabriel Mountains of California after failing to return from a hike on Mount Baldy. Although the San Gabriel Range lies outside the Appalachian system, the documented circumstances illustrate how elevation and winter conditions alter perceived distance. The case was covered by the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department and reported by national news outlets. Mount Baldy rises above 10,000 feet and features steep winter terrain. Search efforts began on the 13th of January 2023 after Sands was reported overdue. The Sheriff's Department issued public statements noting high winds and icy conditions that limited helicopter access. Ground teams navigated snow-covered slopes where established trails were obscured. Officials emphasized that recent storms had changed the landscape significantly from standard hiking maps. Search operations extended over several months, involving drones, aviation units, and volunteer searchers. On the 24th of June 2023, hikers discovered human remains in the Mount Baldy area. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department later confirmed identification as Julian Sands. Official releases described the terrain as steep and exposed, with weather conditions that had complicated recovery efforts. While Mount Baldy differs geographically from Appalachian ridges, the principle recorded in official statements applies broadly. Winter weather and elevation can transform a familiar route into an altered landscape. Snow accumulation conceals trail markers and fills depressions. Ice increases travel time and risk. A distance that appears manageable on a map becomes prolonged when each step requires testing footing. In the Appalachian Mountains, similar conditions occur during winter storms and periods of freezing rain. Sections of the trail in the Great Smoky Mountains and the White Mountains experience ice cover that obscures blazes and changes slope stability. Park advisories routinely caution that mileage estimates assume dry conditions. Under snow or ice, average pace declines. Search documentation from eastern agencies reflects these adjustments. Teams account for terrain difficulty when calculating search grids, often reducing expected coverage per hour in steep or obstructed sections. The geometry of contour lines on a map signals gradient, but without direct experience, it can be difficult to translate tightly spaced lines into physical strain. In Julian Sands' case, the Sheriff's Department publicly acknowledged that recent storms had rendered portions of Mount Baldy inaccessible. Helicopters were grounded during high wind advisories. Ground teams reported that avalanche risk and unstable snowpack limited approach routes. The map representation of trails did not reflect these transient hazards at the time of his hike. The Appalachian Trail corridor contains stretches where contour intervals tighten along ridgelines and narrow gaps. A mile across a ridge may involve repeated elevation change rather than a steady traverse. Hikers referencing guidebooks may note cumulative elevation gain figures, but those numbers are often secondary to total distance in casual planning. Printed maps also omit the density of vegetation and the condition of footing. Rocky scrambles, exposed routes, and eroded sections require slower movement. In wet conditions, mud increases exertion. These factors are not visible in the simplified lines of a topographic sheet. Law enforcement and park agencies frequently publish guidance encouraging hikers to begin early and to allow additional time for return. These advisories are based on documented patterns of delayed returns linked to underestimation of terrain. The message remains consistent across regions. Distance alone does not measure effort. The Mount Baldy search remains part of official records maintained by the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. Statements released during the operation focused on weather, slope, and safety conditions. The terrain dictated the pace and scope of the search. In wooded mountain systems, whether in California or along the Appalachian chain, maps compress space into scale. elevation and environment expanded again in practice. Official reports from multiple regions show that misjudging this compression can alter the timeline of a hike and the complexity of a search. When light leaves the ridge, daylight in the Appalachian Mountains does not fade evenly. Ridges hold light longer than coves. Western slopes darken first as the sun drops behind parallel lines of elevation. Dense canopy accelerates the shift. Under full leaf cover, evening can arrive along the trail while the sky above remains pale. The difference between open overlook and forested switchback can amount to several minutes of usable visibility. The Appalachian Trail crosses multiple microclimates as it runs along the spine of the range. In Shenandoah National Park, for example, Skyline Drive parallels the trail along the crest, but the path itself often dips below the ridgeline into tree cover. The white blazes that are clear at midday can blend into bark and shadow near dusk. They are not reflective markers. As evening approaches, contrast decreases before darkness is complete. The human eye loses color differentiation first. Painted rectangles on trees become gray against gray. Rocks and roots merge with soil. The tread remains present, but its edges soften. Hikers who misjudge remaining light may find themselves between blazes with no immediate visual reference. National Park Service search and rescue materials describe twilight as a common factor in overdue hiker reports. The combination of reduced light and fatigue can alter navigation decisions. Individuals may continue forward rather than stop, believing that the next marker or junction lies only a short distance ahead. Once darkness sets in, retracing steps becomes more complex in forested terrain without artificial lighting. On the 24th of October, 2015, 66-year-old Geraldine Largay's remains were located in Maine after she had gone missing on the 22nd of July, 2013, along the Appalachian Trail. That case involved prolonged separation from the main corridor after stepping off the tread. Although it occurred in summer, her journal entries, later recovered, described diminishing light during her initial hours alone. The Maine Warden Service summary includes reference to her attempts to locate the trail before nightfall on the day she became lost. A separate case within the Appalachian system highlights the role of fading daylight more directly. On the 21st of January, 2012, 9-year-old college student Anna S. Brown disappeared while hiking in the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina. The case was reported by local authorities and covered by regional news outlets at the time. Pisgah National Forest contains sections of the Appalachian Mountains characterized by steep slopes and dense hardwood forest. According to reporting from the period, Brown had set out for a day hike and did not return as expected. Search operations began after she was reported missing. Law enforcement agencies, including the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office, coordinated efforts with volunteers and search teams familiar with the terrain. The initial search area focused on established trails and known viewpoints. The terrain in Pisgah includes ridgelines that descend sharply into forested coves. Trails may follow old logging roads before narrowing into footpaths. In winter months, leaf cover is reduced, but daylight hours are shorter. Sunset in late January occurs earlier than in summer, leaving a narrow window for return travel after mid-afternoon. Search updates indicated that teams worked through fading light during the first days. Officials noted that nightfall limited visibility and required suspension of some operations until morning. Helicopter flights were restricted to daylight hours. Ground teams relied on headlamps after dark, but acknowledged that uneven terrain slowed progress. In Appalachian forests, artificial light creates narrow cones of vision. Headlamps illuminate immediate ground but reduce peripheral awareness. Shadows deepen beyond the beam. Trail markers that are easily recognized in daylight may not reflect enough light to stand out at night. Park advisories commonly recommend carrying a reliable light source, even for short hikes, to account for unexpected delay. Official documentation from search and rescue units across the eastern United States frequently references the last light period as critical. The interval between sunset and full darkness may prompt hurried decisions. Hikers who are uncertain of their location may attempt to reach a known landmark before dark rather than remain in place. If they descend into a cove or follow a faint path, regaining the original tread in darkness becomes increasingly difficult. In the Brown case, searchers covered steep terrain and drainage areas over multiple days. Media reports described challenging conditions, but did not attribute disappearance to a single factor. The landscape itself was cited as complex, with intersecting paths and wooded slopes. The investigation continued, without definitive resolution publicly documented in the years following. Daylight duration varies seasonally across the Appalachian Range. In winter, ridge shadows lengthen by mid-afternoon. In summer, Heavy canopy can produce early dimming under thick leaves, even when sunset remains an hour away. Trail maintenance schedules do not adjust markers for seasonal light. Blazes remain static against dynamic condition. Search manuals published by the National Park Service emphasize pre-trip planning that accounts for sunset time and terrain difficulty. The guidance is procedural rather than speculative. It notes that many overdue hiker calls originate when individuals underestimate the time required to return before dark. Even in areas where the Appalachian Trail parallels roads, the descent from ridge to pavement can require extended time. In Shenandoah National Park, side trails connecting to Skyline Drive may appear short on a map, but involve steep switchbacks. As light fades, contrast between tread and surrounding ground diminishes. Rocks and roots that are visible at noon may become indistinct obstacles in twilight. The Brown search demonstrated standard response patterns. Establish last known point. Deploy ground teams. Expand outward based on terrain features. Officials did not release detailed speculation regarding how or when she may have left established routes. Public statements focused on search scope and community assistance. In the Appalachian context, the interaction between terrain and light is consistent. Ridges retain brightness briefly before valleys darken. Dense hardwood stands filter, remaining light unevenly. The absence of reflective markers means that visual navigation relies on residual daylight or artificial illumination. Nightfall in forested mountains also alters sound perception. As ambient noise decreases, distant sounds may appear closer or more isolated. However, directional accuracy remains limited without visual confirmation. Search and rescue materials advise lost hikers to remain stationary after dark to increase likelihood of detection at first light. Official reports across eastern parks note that hikers sometimes continue moving in the dark under the assumption that the trail remains close. Without clear markers, footpaths can diverge subtly. A faint animal trail or erosion line may appear similar to the established tread when viewed through a narrow beam. The Pisgah terrain where Brown disappeared includes sections where trails intersect older logging routes. These intersections may not be heavily signed. In low light, the difference between main trail and side path can be minimal. Search teams typically evaluate these nodes early in operations due to their potential for confusion. Across the Appalachian chain, sunset times vary by latitude and season, but the structural pattern of diminishing ridge light remains similar. Trail guides list mileage and elevation gain, but they do not chart light angles or canopy density. Hikers rely on experience and awareness of time to gauge return. Search documentation, available through public records, emphasizes that most successful recoveries occur within the first 24 hours, often aided by daylight. As hours pass and night cycles repeat, terrain becomes more significant in determining outcome. The procedural focus remains on mapping probable travel corridors and checking drainage lines, ridges, and junctions. In the Brown case, authorities suspended and resumed active searching over time. Publicly available information indicates that no definitive resolution was announced in subsequent years. The terrain of Pisgah National Forest remains open to hikers, with posted advisories regarding preparation and daylight awareness. The Appalachian Mountains present a layered environment where elevation, canopy, and season interact with time of day. When light leaves the ridge, navigation becomes more dependent on memory and artificial illumination. Official guidance from trail organizations and park agencies continues to stress planning around daylight hours as a fundamental safety measure. Signals that go unanswered. Cellular coverage across the Appalachian Mountains is uneven by design and by geography. Towers are positioned along accessible ridges and near population centers. Valleys and interior hollows often fall outside reliable signal range. Even where coverage maps show service, reception can fluctuate with elevation, canopy density, and weather. A device may register 1 bar at a crest and lose contact after a short descent into timber. Emergency communication on public lands in the eastern United States relies on multiple systems. Cellular networks connect to local dispatch centers. In more remote areas, satellite messengers and personal locator beacons provide alternatives. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy advises hikers not to assume continuous service and to prepare for periods without connectivity. Search and rescue manuals used by the National Park Service describe communication gaps as a recurring operational factor. When a hiker attempts to call for help from a low-lying area, the call may fail to connect. Text messages can remain queued without delivery confirmation. Dispatch centers receiving incomplete location data must rely on last known points and witness accounts. In February 2022, 24-year-old Gabby Petito's fiancé, Brian Laundrie, was found deceased in Florida after a prolonged search in the Carlton Reserve. Although the search occurred outside the Appalachian Range, the documented role of electronic evidence in that case illustrates broader patterns relevant to remote terrain. Law enforcement reviewed cell phone data, GPS records, and digital timelines to reconstruct movements. Coverage gaps and delayed data access influenced the sequence of public updates. Within the Appalachian corridor itself, similar limitations appear in documented incidents. On the 11th of March 2018, 20-year-old Patrick Brewer disappeared while hiking near the Blue Ridge Parkway in North Carolina. The case was reported by the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office and covered by regional media. Brewer's vehicle was located at a trailhead parking area. Investigators used cell phone records to narrow potential search zones, but reception in the surrounding forested terrain was inconsistent. Public statements indicated that search teams deployed drones, K-9 units, and ground crews across steep slopes and wooded ravines. Brewer's last known phone activity provided limited coordinates, insufficient to pinpoint exact location. Law enforcement emphasized that mountainous topography interfered with signal strength and triangulation accuracy. In Appalachian forests, signal propagation is influenced by line of sight to towers. Ridges can block direct transmission. Dense hardwood canopy attenuates radio frequency slightly, though terrain remains the primary obstacle. In narrow hollows, a phone may search continuously for service without success. A hiker attempting to send a message may assume delivery when none occurs. Search documentation from Eastern agencies often includes analysis of digital evidence. Investigators review timestamps for outgoing calls or texts, battery-level data, and any GPS metadata embedded in photographs. However, these records depend on network interaction. Without a connection, devices may store information locally without transmitting it in real time. In the Brewer case, search operations continued for several weeks. Authorities suspended active ground searching after covering high-probability areas. Public updates focused on ongoing investigative review rather than field deployment. The case remains unresolved in publicly available records. The Appalachian Trail Corridor includes segments where coverage is more reliable near road crossings and towns. Thru-hikers often report regaining service at gaps or summits while losing it along interior stretches. Trail guides and online forums commonly mention specific ridges where calls connect. These informal maps do not guarantee consistency, as tower maintenance and weather affect performance. Personal locator beacons and satellite messengers offer alternative communication methods independent of cellular infrastructure. Park agencies recommend such devices for extended backcountry travel. Unlike phones, these units transmit directly to satellites and relay coordinates to rescue coordination centers. Even so, heavy canopy or deep canyon walls can delay transmission. Search and rescue reports describe instances in which emergency calls dropped before dispatchers obtained full information. In some cases, partial coordinates derived from cell tower pings provided broad search areas rather than precise points. Teams then applied standard terrain analysis to prioritize ridges, drainages, and trail intersections. Communication gaps also influence decision-making by hikers themselves. A person who expects to regain service shortly may continue moving rather than conserve battery and remain stationary. This movement can complicate search patterns if last known digital data no longer reflects current location. Public land managers in the Appalachian region publish advisories encouraging hikers to inform others of planned routes before departure. Written itineraries provide fixed reference points independent of electronic coverage. These recommendations appear in visitor materials and on official websites. In forested mountains, signals behave differently from open plains. Radio waves travel outward until interrupted by elevation changes. A valley may sit in a coverage shadow, even when adjacent ridges display service. The visual presence of a town in the distance does not ensure connectivity from a slope below. The Brewer investigation underscores how electronic data can narrow but not eliminate uncertainty in wooded terrain. Law enforcement statements emphasize that limited phone activity constrained the timeline. Ground searches relied on physical terrain analysis rather than continuous digital tracking. Across the Appalachian system, search teams integrate technology with traditional methods. Digital records offer timestamps and possible coordinates. Terrain assessment determines likely movement corridors. Communication infrastructure, while expanding, remains incomplete in remote sections. Official guidance continues to treat electronic devices as supplemental rather than primary safety measures. Printed maps, knowledge of daylight, and awareness of terrain remain central to backcountry travel planning. The combination of ridges, hollows, and canopy ensures that certain signals will continue to go unanswered in specific locations, footprints that blend into the tread. On heavily used sections of Appalachian trails, the ground records thousands of steps each week. Soil compacts under repeated pressure. Leaf litter is pushed aside and replaced by dust or mud depending on weather. In such conditions, an individual set of footprints rarely stands apart for long. Distinct impressions soften quickly beneath new traffic or light rain. Trail surfaces in the Appalachian corridor vary by elevation and maintenance history. Some stretches consist of packed dirt reinforced by water bars and stone steps. Others follow exposed rock where prints do not register at all. In lower elevations, especially near road crossings and popular access points, the tread can widen into multiple parallel lanes. These lanes form as hikers avoid puddles or rough patches, gradually expanding the corridor. Search and rescue documentation in eastern parks frequently notes the difficulty of isolating specific tracks on well-traveled routes. Investigators may examine trailheads for shoe impressions in softer ground, but beyond the first few yards, identification becomes uncertain. Rainfall accelerates this process by smoothing edges and redistributing sediment. The Appalachian Trail through New Hampshire's White Mountains provides an example of high traffic combined with complex terrain. In this region, the trail overlaps with popular routes in the Presidential Range. The tread often crosses alpine rock, gravel, and patches of soil between boulders. In summer, hundreds of hikers may pass a single point in a day. On the 2nd of August 2011, 28-year-old hiker Robert Bob Hayes was reported missing after setting out on a solo hike in the White Mountain National Forest. His vehicle was located at the Appalachia Trailhead, a common access point for Mount Madison and adjacent peaks. The case was reported by New Hampshire Fish and Game and covered by regional news outlets. Initial search efforts focused on established trails radiating from the parking area, including segments that connect with the Appalachian Trail along the ridgeline. Teams from New Hampshire Fish and Game, volunteer search units, and aviation resources canvassed marked routes and adjacent drainages. Public statements indicated that weather conditions were clear during the early stages, but high foot traffic complicated track identification. The Appalachia Trailhead serves multiple routes that converge before separating higher on the ridge. Soil near the parking lot can retain prints in damp conditions, but farther along, the tread transitions to rock slabs and loose gravel. Officials reported that no definitive footprint trail attributable to Hayes was identified beyond the immediate access area. As search operations expanded, crews examined side paths, rock scrambles, and less defined herd paths that branch from the main tread. In alpine sections, where vegetation thins, rock surfaces hold no impressions. Investigators relied on route probability analysis rather than physical track continuity. The search extended over several days, incorporating canine teams trained to detect scent along high-traffic trails. New Hampshire Fish and Game statements described the challenge of distinguishing individual scent and track amid numerous hikers. Volunteers and search personnel themselves added new footprints to the environment during grid searches. Rain events, though intermittent, altered ground texture and erased faint impressions in soil pockets between rocks. Weeks later, Hayes' remains were located off-trail in a wooded area not immediately visible from the main route. Authorities indicated that he had likely left the established path at some point. The terrain between the trail and the discovery site consisted of uneven ground with intermittent rock and vegetation cover. Public releases did not detail a single precipitating factor, but confirmed identification following recovery. The White Mountains differ in character from the Southern Appalachians, yet they share the same structural reality of concentrated foot traffic along designated routes. Popular trailheads funnel hikers onto narrow corridors. When someone leaves that corridor, their path intersects with overlapping prints and disturbed soil near junctions. Trail maintenance crews often harden high-use sections with stone or gravel to reduce erosion. This practice improves durability, but reduces the capacity of the ground to record individual steps. In contrast, lightly traveled backcountry paths may retain clearer impressions, but are less likely to be immediate search priorities. Search manuals emphasize that footprint tracking is most effective in early hours after disappearance and in soft substrates such as mud or sand. On rocky Appalachian ridges, these conditions are uncommon. Investigators, instead, map probable travel choices based on terrain, known destinations, and time of day. The Hayes case illustrates how quickly physical traces blend into the tread on heavily used routes. Even with organized response, and multiple agencies involved. Isolating a continuous trail of prints proved unfeasible. Officials relied on systematic coverage rather than visible track following. Across the Appalachian Range, similar dynamics appear at major access points. Parking lots fill on clear weekends. Hikers of varying experience levels enter and exit along the same ground. By afternoon, the surface may show no distinct direction of travel. Footprints overlap until they become a single pattern. Environmental factors add further complexity. Light rain rounds edges of impressions without fully erasing them, creating partial shapes that resemble multiple shoe types. Dry spells harden soil, preserving faint outlines that are indistinguishable from older marks. Fallen leaves obscure shallow prints within hours during autumn. Search reports from the eastern United States consistently acknowledge these variables. Investigators document initial attempts to identify track patterns at trailheads, then transition to terrain analysis once prints disperse. The process is procedural and recorded in after-action summaries. In the White Mountains, alpine exposure introduces another factor. Wind can redistribute gravel and small debris across rocky surfaces, further masking any sign of passage. Where the Appalachian Trail traverses open rock, the route is marked by cairns rather than paint. Between cairns, hikers rely on sightlines. Footprints are absent entirely. The Hayes search concluded with recovery and official identification, documented by New Hampshire Fish and Game. The terrain and traffic conditions were noted in public briefings as part of the operational overview. No singular environmental anomaly was cited. Instead, routine trail characteristics shaped the difficulty of locating distinct physical evidence. Throughout the Appalachian corridor, from Georgia to Maine, marked routes attract steady movement. The tread is both guide and record, but its record is collective. Individual steps merge into a shared surface. Search teams account for this by prioritizing timing and systematic coverage, rather than relying solely on footprints. On well-traveled paths, traces dissolve into the pattern of use. Official documentation from multiple agencies reflects this constraint in practical terms. The ground does not preserve intention, only pressure. In high-traffic mountain environments, that pressure becomes indistinguishable within hours. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing for more deep dive content like this. Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know what topic you'd like us to explore next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.